It is 1:15 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. Saturday, February 28, 2026. Most of America is asleep. In an undisclosed operations room, somewhere in the Persian Gulf theater, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the most advanced aircraft the United States military owns, are already in the air. They have been for hours. Alongside them, a combination of Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from U.S. warships, HIMARS ground-launched rockets, and Israeli fighter jets streaming in from the west. The target, Tehran, not a missile site, not a weapons depot, the seat of power of the Islamic Republic of Iran. By 9:45 a.m. local time in Tehran, a regular Saturday morning, the first workday of the Iranian week, the sky above the Pasteur district, home to the presidential palace, the supreme leader's compound, and the National Security Council offices, erupts in fire. The strikes hit at least 6 cities simultaneously: Tehran, Isfahan, Qum, Karaj, Kermanshah. A near-total internet blackout sweeps across Iran within minutes. And at 1:15 p.m. Eastern, without a press conference, without a prime-time address, without a single member of Congress formally informed in advance, President Donald J. Trump posts a video to Truth Social. The United States of America, working closely with our great friend and ally, the State of Israel, has just completed a massive and very powerful attack on Iran. That is how the American people learn they are at war. By nightfall Saturday, the confirmed dead include Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, 86 years old, in power since 1989, along with his defense minister, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the chief of staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, and at least 5 other senior officials who had gathered for a morning meeting. CIA intelligence, gathered with high confidence, had tracked that meeting. The timeline was accelerated to seize what a senior defense official called a target of opportunity. By Sunday morning, Iran had fired back, launching dozens of ballistic missiles and drones at U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Iranian state media reported that one airstrike struck a girls' primary school in southern Iran. According to local prosecutors, at least 85 children were killed. The school sat near a military base. 3 American troops are dead. Dubai International Airport, one of the busiest transit hubs on Earth, is shut down. 150 oil tankers have dropped anchor in open Gulf waters, afraid to move through the Strait of Hormuz. Oil, which settled at $72.48 a barrel on Friday, leapt past $80 on Monday's open, a 13% single-day spike, the largest in 4 years. Here is why this matters to you, whether you live in a small town in Chillicothe, Ohio, or you are a tech worker in Austin, Texas. If the Strait of Hormuz closes, that 21-mile-wide bottleneck at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, roughly 1/5 of the world's daily oil supply, stops moving. Your gas is currently $2.98 a gallon. Analysts are already warning it could spike by 50 cents or more. Your grocery bill, your heating bill, your delivery costs, they are all tied to fuel. And fuel is now tied to a war that nobody voted for. This is not a story happening somewhere far away. This story is the economy. This story is the midterm elections. This story is the question that every American, left, right, and center, deserves an honest answer to: how did we get here? To understand Operation Epic Fury, the name given by the U.S. Department of Defense to the February 28 strikes, Israel called its component Roaring Lion, you have to go back at least 3 years, because this war did not begin on a Saturday morning. It began in a slow, grinding escalation that most Americans were never fully told about. In 2023, Iran's nuclear program crossed thresholds that alarmed Western intelligence agencies. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that Iran had enriched uranium to 84% purity, just below the 90% weapons-grade threshold. The diplomatic window, never fully open to begin with, began closing fast. Throughout 2024, a quiet but intensifying shadow war played out across the Middle East. Israel conducted targeted operations against Iranian proxy networks in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. Iran answered with drone swarms, ballistic missile salvos, and support for Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping, disrupting global trade routes that were already strained from COVID-era supply chain damage. Then in June 2025, the first major confrontation, a 12-day conflict. U.S. forces supporting Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities. Trump declared victory. He told the American people that Iran's nuclear program had been completely and totally obliterated. It had not been. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, a Republican, said it plainly this past weekend. It's a year later, and we're still trying to decide that. The CIA's own assessment, leaked to multiple outlets in late 2025, concluded that Iran had reconstituted significant portions of its enrichment capability within months of the June 2025 strikes, partly because critical underground facilities had survived, and partly because Iran's scientific community moved fast. But the nuclear question was not the only accelerant. In January 2026, the Iranian government did something that would prove fatally consequential. It massacred thousands of its own civilians in what became the largest internal crackdown since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The protests, which had been building since the Mahsa Amini uprising years earlier, had reached a new pitch. Khamenei's response was ruthless. The images that emerged from Tehran, shot on phones smuggled out through VPNs before the internet crackdowns, were devastating. Young people, workers, women without hijabs standing in the streets until the Basij paramilitary forces opened fire. Trump responded publicly. He made a promise, vague but unmistakable, that help is on the way. Congressional sources now confirm that, in the weeks that followed, the administration began quietly accelerating war planning. There was, in fact, a diplomatic off-ramp. In the weeks before the strikes, Iran and the United States were engaged in indirect nuclear negotiations, mediated by Oman. A second round of talks was scheduled in Geneva. Those talks were to be led on the American side by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the same team that brokered deals in Gaza. The Guardian reported, just days before the strikes began, that the decision to act militarily would be determined by the outcome of that Geneva meeting. The Geneva meeting never happened. It is still not fully clear why. Administration officials maintain that Iran was negotiating in bad faith, using the diplomatic cover to buy time to reconstitute its nuclear program. Critics, including Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, counter that there was no intelligence that Iran was on the verge of launching any kind of preemptive strike against the United States, that this was, in Warner's precise words, a war of choice. What is verifiable is this. CIA intelligence in the days before February 28 identified that Khamenei and his entire senior security apparatus would be in one location on Saturday morning. A senior defense official told Fox News that there was a deliberate decision to accelerate the timeline, to capitalize on the target of opportunity. The Geneva talks were abandoned. The bombs fell instead. Operation Epic Fury was not improvised. Israeli military officials confirmed that months-long planning preceded the strikes. The operation used over 1,200 bombs in the first 24 hours. US B-2 stealth bombers, the planes specifically designed to penetrate hardened underground facilities, struck Iran's fortified ballistic missile infrastructure. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from US warships in the Persian Gulf. HIMARS ground systems fired. An undisclosed category of long-range standoff weapons was used for the first time in combat. Multiple strikes hit the Pasteur district of Tehran simultaneously, including the Supreme Leader's compound, the Presidential Palace, and the offices of the National Security Council. Strikes were also confirmed in Qum, Isfahan, Karaj, and Kermanshah. Khamenei's daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, and daughter-in-law were also killed in the strike on his compound, according to the Fars news agency. By Sunday, the IRGC had launched what it called the most intense offensive operation in the history of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic. Iranian missiles and drones targeted U.S. bases in at least 7 countries across the region. An oil tanker was struck off the coast of Oman. The Iranian Navy broadcast a message over maritime radio frequencies. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. It is not yet fully confirmed as an official closure. But 150 tankers have stopped moving anyway. Let us be precise about what we know versus what we believe versus what the internet is saying. On the Strait of Hormuz and global energy, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration and confirmed by a Congressional Research Service report, approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day transited the Strait of Hormuz in 2024, roughly 27% of all global maritime oil trade. An additional 22% of global liquefied natural gas, most of it from Qatar, also passes through the strait. These are not disputed numbers. They are the baseline for every economic model anyone is running right now. Before the strikes, Brent crude settled at $72.48 per barrel on Friday, February 27th. By Monday's open, it crossed $80, a spike of more than 9%, with an intraday peak that represented a 13% move. That is the largest single-day oil price rally in 4 years. Goldman Sachs, in an analyst note published over the weekend, estimated that a sustained disruption to Strait of Hormuz shipping could push Brent crude past $100 per barrel. CNBC's Energy Desk reported on analysis from energy consultancy Kavanik that stated, a full, prolonged Hormuz closure could present a scenario 3 times the severity of the Arab oil embargo of the 1970s, and potentially drive oil into triple digits while LNG prices retest the record highs of 2022. For ordinary Americans, the national average for gasoline is currently $2.98 per gallon. A Brent price of $100 would, according to most industry models, translate to a gas price somewhere between $3.8 and $4.5 at the pump, depending on refinery capacity and regional variables. That kind of spike, sustained over 60 to 90 days, historically produces measurable increases in the consumer price index, the headline inflation number that has defined American economic anxiety for the past 4 years. On the congressional authorization question, Article I, Section 8 of the United States Constitution is unambiguous. Congress, not the President, holds the power to declare war. The War Powers Resolution of 1973, passed in the wake of Vietnam, requires the President to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing U.S. forces to hostilities and to withdraw those forces within 60 days absent congressional authorization. The administration notified only the Gang of Eight, the top House and Senate leaders and intelligence committee chairs from both parties, and did so only shortly before the strikes commenced, not in advance of the decision to strike. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made those calls. The full Congress was given no briefing. No authorization for the use of military force was sought. No formal declaration of war was asked for or given. Before the Iraq War in March 2003, President George W. Bush spent months in public diplomacy, making the case to Congress and the American public. He secured an authorization for the use of military force with 296 votes in the House and 77 in the Senate. That process took the better part of a year. Trump announced this war on Truth Social at approximately 1:15 p.m. Eastern on a Saturday afternoon. On casualties, the Iranian Red Crescent Society reported more than 200 people killed in the initial strikes across Iran. Iranian state media reported that one strike killed at least 85 children at a girls' primary school in southern Iran that sat near a military base. 3 U.S. troops have been confirmed killed. At least 31 people were killed in Lebanon by Sunday evening, as Hezbollah, responding to Khamenei's death, fired missiles into northern Israel for the first time in over a year. Protests outside the U.S. consulate in Karachi, Pakistan turned violent. At least 9 people died in clashes with security forces. Here is where the analysis fractures. We spoke, on background, to 2 senior economic observers with deeply different reads on what happens next. Look, the global economy has shown remarkable resilience to Middle East disruptions. During the entire period of U.S. operations in Iraq, 2003 to 2011, crude oil averaged roughly $72 per barrel. Adjusted to today's dollars, that's north of $100 per barrel. The global economy not only operated under those conditions, it grew. Supply fundamentals going into February 2026 were strong. The world was actually oversupplied with oil heading into this conflict. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have pipeline infrastructure that partially bypasses Hormuz. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve exists precisely for moments like this. Don't hyperventilate. The more immediate risk is not $100 oil. It is volatility. Markets hate uncertainty more than they hate high prices. If the operation wraps in Trump's promised 4 weeks or less, and Iran's new interim leadership council moves toward negotiation, you could see Brent settle back toward the mid-80s and the global economy absorbs the shock cleanly. The bull case assumes a best-case scenario on every single variable simultaneously. It assumes Hormuz stays functionally open. It assumes Iran's retaliation stays conventional and targeted. Assumes Saudi and Gulf infrastructure isn't hit. That's three separate enormous assumptions, any one of which, if wrong, breaks the whole model. Bob McNally, former White House energy advisor to George W. Bush, hardly a partisan figure, said it clearly: a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a guaranteed global recession. He estimates the probability of Saudi infrastructure being struck at approximately 33%. The market is not pricing that risk adequately. What you would see in that scenario is hoarding, especially by China and India, which import roughly 69% of all crude passing through Hormuz. That hoarding dynamic alone can spike prices faster than any physical supply disruption. And here's what nobody on Wall Street wants to say: we're already in a fragile inflationary environment. Core CPI has not returned to 2%. The Fed has been managing a delicate balance. The gas price spike to $4.5 reignites headline inflation in a way that forces the Fed's hand. That's not just a pump price problem, that's a rate problem, that's a housing problem, that's an everything problem. Now the rumors, the theories, the things trending on X, Substack, and TikTok that official sources neither confirm nor fully deny. We are not dismissing these. We are analyzing them because millions of Americans are forming their understanding of this war from them. Rumor number one: the timing of the Austin bar shooting was too convenient. Within hours of the Tehran strikes, a gunman opened fire on Austin's 6th Street Entertainment District, killing 2 civilians before being shot dead. The FBI identified the suspect as Ndiaga Diagne, 53, a naturalized U.S. citizen from Senegal. He wore a sweatshirt reading "Property of Allah" and a shirt bearing an Iranian flag. On X, the theory circulating among tens of thousands of accounts: the timing, less than 24 hours after Operation Epic Fury, was not coincidental. Some accounts claim the attack was pre-coordinated with Iran's intelligence services. Others go further, suggesting it was a false flag to justify domestic security crackdowns. The official counter-argument: the FBI and Austin police have provided no evidence of foreign direction or coordination. The suspect was a U.S. citizen with no previously flagged ties to foreign intelligence services. The IRGC statement threatening retaliation came after the Austin shooting, not before it. Investigators have noted that lone wolf radicalization, particularly in the hours following high-profile geopolitical events, is a well-documented phenomenon in domestic terrorism literature. Why people believe it anyway? Because the timing is genuinely extraordinary. Because the government has a documented history, from the Gulf of Tonkin to the Iraq WMD claims, of allowing or exaggerating incidents to build public support for military action. The suspicion is not irrational. It reflects earned institutional distrust. That does not make the theory true, but it explains why it spreads. Rumor number two: the OpenAI Pentagon deal was pre-arranged before Anthropic's ban. Within hours of the Trump administration blacklisting Anthropic's AI tools from federal use, after Anthropic refused to allow its systems to be used for autonomous weapons applications, OpenAI announced a deal with the Department of Defense to provide AI to classified military networks. On Reddit's Our Machine Learning and across Substack's AI policy community, the question is sharp. Did OpenAI have that deal structured in advance, waiting for Anthropic to be removed? The speed of the pivot, hours, not weeks, is striking. The official counter-argument: the DoD maintains that its procurement processes, even expedited ones, cannot be finalized in hours. Administration officials argue the timing reflects pre-existing relationship building between OpenAI and defense contractors, not collusion. Why people believe it anyway? Because the corporate and government incentive structures make collusion plausible. Because a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars over the DoD's projected $1.8 billion AI budget for 2026 is not typically negotiated in an afternoon. The smell test, as one senior Silicon Valley policy observer told us privately, does not pass. Rumor number three: Trump is manufacturing a war to cancel or influence the 2026 midterms. This theory has broken through from fringe to mainstream. It is being openly discussed not just on TikTok, but on cable news panels. The core argument: a president who enters a midterm cycle with historically low approval ratings on the economy now has the traditional rally-round-the-flag effect working in his favor. Wartime presidents historically see short-term approval spikes. The official counter-argument: the CIA's intelligence on the Khamenei meeting location was legitimate and time-sensitive, according to multiple sourced reports. The military planning, confirmed by Israeli officials, took months. Netanyahu's own political timeline, facing domestic legal pressures and coalition politics, provided independent motivation for the Israeli component. The theory requires that Trump fabricated or manufactured an intelligence opportunity that multiple allied governments and their own independent intelligence services also accepted. Why people believe it anyway? Because American presidents have used foreign crises for domestic political purposes before. Because Trump's announcement on Truth Social, rather than from the Oval Office, reads, to many observers, more like a campaign post than a wartime address. Because the midterms are 8 months away, and a protracted conflict in the Middle East creates a permanent national security frame that advantages an incumbent executive. None of this proves intent. All of it is worth examining. America has a long, uncomfortable relationship with war as entertainment, and in the social media age, the speed at which tragedy becomes content and content becomes politics is breathtaking. Within 12 hours of the Truth Social announcement, the dominant cultural product of Operation Epic Fury was not a news report, it was a meme. The image that spread fastest was the split screen. Every previous wartime president, Roosevelt addressing Congress after Pearl Harbor, Johnson announcing Gulf of Tonkin on national television, Bush speaking from the Oval Office on September 11th, Obama announcing the death of bin Laden, juxtaposed with Trump's Truth Social video, shot with a flag behind him, delivered without a single reporter present to ask a question. Caption that looped most virally: a normal president versus your president. On TikTok, audio from Trump's announcement, specifically the phrase massive and ongoing, was remixed within hours into dark humor content, with creators soundtracking it against footage of mundane American life. A man mowing his lawn, a woman in a Target checkout line, a kid doing homework. The subtext: the cognitive dissonance of a nation told it is at war while its daily life appears, for now, unchanged. On Reddit's r/politics and r/world news, the thread, "He started a war and went back to golf," referencing that Trump was at Mar-a-Lago when the strikes began and continued his weekend schedule, accumulated more than 100,000 upvotes by Sunday afternoon. Senior administration officials were conspicuously absent from all Sunday morning news shows. The communications blackout during an active military operation struck veteran journalists as, in their words, historically unprecedented. The hashtag "Who voted for this" trended on X throughout Saturday night. By Sunday, it had been countered by Operation Epic Fury and Trump delivers from supporters who framed the killing of Khamenei as a historic triumph. John Fetterman, Democrat of Pennsylvania, posted, "President Trump has been willing to do what's right and necessary to produce real peace in the region. God bless the United States, our great military, and Israel." His mentions exploded. His post was screenshot and weaponized by both sides simultaneously. Lindsey Graham went on NBC's Meet the Press and said, with characteristic bluntness, that it was not our job to pick Iran's next leader, while simultaneously praising the operation as necessary and long justified. The clip was cut into a meme within 30 minutes. We do not yet have post-strike polling, but the pre-existing sentiment landscape, drawn from Gallup and Ipsos data from early February 2026, gives us a baseline. Going into this weekend, only 36% of Americans said they supported military action against Iran without congressional authorization. Roughly 58% said Congress should be required to vote before any sustained military campaign in Iran. Those numbers cut across party lines more sharply than most foreign policy questions do, a reflection of genuine war fatigue in an electorate that lived through Iraq, Afghanistan, and the first Trump-era Iranian tensions. Ipsos data from January 2026 showed that 71% of Americans listed cost of living and inflation as their top concerns, dwarfing foreign policy, which registered at 14%. That is, the electorate Donald Trump is now asking to support a conflict that, on its worst-case economic trajectory, could reignite the very inflation crisis that has defined American economic anxiety for 4 years. The human stories emerging from this conflict are already fragmenting public opinion in ways that no pollster fully anticipated. In Ohio, in towns like Zanesville and Lima, where National Guard units are always one deployment order away from activation, the first question being asked is not ideological. It is personal. Is my kid going? Trump has insisted there will be no ground troops. But no ground troops is the same promise that preceded every gradual escalation of the past half-century. In Austin, Texas, where the bar shooting has layered a domestic terror attack onto a foreign war within a single news cycle, the community is processing grief and rage simultaneously. Local officials are navigating between acknowledging the FBI's terrorism investigation and resisting the political pressure to declare the shooting proof of an Iranian fifth column inside the United States. In Dearborn, Michigan, home to one of the largest Arab-American communities in the country, the footage from Tehran is not abstract. It is family. Community leaders have called for calm while calling the strikes on civilian areas a war crime. Their voices are largely absent from cable news. The midterm elections are in November 2026, 8 months away. That is an eternity in political time. It is also, as history shows, almost exactly the window within which the consequences of a major military decision become clear enough to shift electoral outcomes. The question is not whether this war shapes the midterms. It will. The question is how. The Massey-Connor War powers resolution, bipartisan, constitutionally grounded, almost certainly doomed by veto, is heading to a vote in both chambers this week. Its real function is not legislative. It is electoral. Every member of Congress who votes against it is on record supporting a president's unilateral authority to start a war. Every member who votes for it will be accused, in attack ads, of abandoning Israel and siding with Iran. The vote is a trap for both parties, and both parties know it. Ro Khanna framed it in explicitly historic terms. I think this has a real chance of passing, and it's going to be seen like the Iraq War vote. He means the 2002 AUMF, the vote that, a decade later, defined and destroyed political careers on both sides of the aisle, from Hillary Clinton to countless forgotten Republicans who bet on the popular war and lived to regret it. Democrats who vote against the resolution, and there will be some, will face primary challenges from an energized anti-war base. Democrats who vote for it and the resolution fails anyway will face general election ads framing them as soft on Iran. The political math is brutal in every direction. For Republicans, the fracture lines are already visible. Thomas Massie, Rand Paul, Warren Davidson, a former Army Ranger, a man who jumped out of planes for this country, saying flatly, no. War requires congressional authorization. These are not fringe voices. They represent a genuine America First, anti-interventionist strain within MAGA that Trump is now running directly against. If the war goes badly, that strain grows, and it votes. Here is what a genuinely good outcome looks like on the most optimistic, credible trajectory. The strikes have, in fact, dismantled the IRGC's command structure so thoroughly that Iran's capacity for sustained conventional retaliation is limited. The Interim Leadership Council, composed of figures who lack Khamenei's absolute authority, moves toward a negotiated posture within weeks. Iran's internal reform movement, emboldened by the regime's sudden vulnerability, pushes for transition. The Strait of Hormuz remains functionally open, or disruptions are brief. Oil prices pull back toward the mid-80s by April. In this scenario, Trump has a genuine foreign policy legacy moment. A nuclear-armed Iran is avoided. The regional balance of power shifts in ways that reduce long-term U.S. military exposure in the Middle East. The midterms play as a referendum on decisive leadership. Even in this best case, 3 U.S. soldiers are dead. At least 85 children died in a school. The constitutional question, whether a president can start a war alone, remains unresolved, and the precedent is set for every future commander-in-chief. And here is the scenario that keeps career intelligence officers awake. The IRGC, decapitated but not destroyed, concludes that Iran faces an existential threat. It deploys its stockpile of mines and short-range missiles to functionally close the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi infrastructure is struck. Global oil markets gap to $120, $140, and stay there. The U.S. Federal Reserve, already in a fragile balancing act, faces a supply shock inflation environment it cannot address with interest rates without triggering a recession. China and India, importing 69% of Hormuz crude, begin emergency hoarding. Fragile developing economies, from Pakistan to Nigeria to Egypt, face fuel import crises that trigger political instability. Russia, aligned with Iran and emboldened by Western distraction, accelerates activity in Eastern Europe. Domestically, gas lines, a CPI spike that erases 4 years of inflation progress, an unemployment uptick as energy-intensive industries cut costs, a midterm election held in the shadow of a war that is costing lives and money with no clear end state. Bob McNally, again, not a partisan figure, but a former White House energy advisor, said this flatly: a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a guaranteed global recession. He put the probability of Iranian strikes on Saudi infrastructure at approximately 33%, a 1 in 3 chance of a guaranteed global recession triggered by a war that Congress never authorized. And in that scenario, the political consequences are impossible to predict, because no modern American political system has faced that combination of variables simultaneously. In the end, this is what we know with certainty as of Monday, March 2, 2026. A war has begun. It was started without a congressional vote. It was announced on social media. The man who started it calls it a path to peace in the Middle East. His critics call it a colossal mistake. Both things cannot be fully true. We will find out which is closer to accurate probably by summer. 3 Americans are dead. At least 85 children died in a school in southern Iran. Khamenei, 86 years old, ruthless, the architect of decades of regional violence and domestic repression, is dead. The world is not, as a result, automatically safer. It is, for now, less certain. And uncertainty is the enemy of economies, of families, and of democracies. For the person living in Chillicothe, Ohio, your gas prices are about to move. Your National Guard neighbor might get a call. Your retirement account will feel the volatility. For the tech worker in Austin, Texas, the AI company you use for work just got blacklisted by the federal government, and the one that replaced it is now helping the Pentagon wage this war. The city you live in buried 3 people this weekend because of it. This is not entertainment. This is not a meme. This is the cost of power exercised without accountability. The question America now has to answer, not at the ballot box in 8 months, but in the streets, in the town halls, in the congressional chambers this week, is deceptively simple. Is this the country we chose to be? Because if the answer is yes, then own it completely. And if the answer is no, then the next vote that matters is not in November. It is this week, in the United States Congress, where a handful of people are trying, imperfectly and probably unsuccessfully, to do the thing the Constitution says they must. Watch that vote. It will tell you more about American democracy than any Truth Social post ever could.